Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Oritra Ghosh, and today we are joined by Eugene Kwon, who is originally from South Korea and is a fourth year PhD candidate in the combined program in Film and Media Studies and East Asian Languages and Literatures. Welcome to the podcast, Eugene.
Thanks for having me, Aritra.
So, today we'll be talking to Eugene about his research at Yale and also how he ended up here. So, Eugene, why don't you start with a kind of like an elevator pitch of your research?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a terrifying moment when we have to explain our research. I do research on the conceptual history of information in Japan and South Korea from the 1960s and onwards, and its impact on various arts, including performance art, video art, and cinema. So, you might be wondering, what I mean by information, right? And why am I focusing on Japan and South Korea of all places in the world? So to answer that first question, the very word information would seem pretty banal and superficial to most people, but it actually has this fascinating history that brings together military history, computer science, cybernetics, and the arts. And today we use the word information to talk about discrete chunks of knowledge, but in fact, many intellectuals and media historians point out that this very word information meant something quite different throughout the 20th century. And actually, it meant something more like a system of flow and circulation in the mid 20th century, which is quite fascinating. And this history of this concept of information has a very particular cultural resonance in Japan and South Korea, particularly after the two countries' experience of World War II and the Korean War. So in my research, I focus on Japan and South Korea because the two countries have such different usages of this concept. And this is what I'd like to show in my research, that this different meaning of the word information is reflected in various artworks from these two countries. And, in Japan, the concept of information functioned almost like a panacea, something that will bring enormous technological advancement and basically solve all of its social problems. And whereas in South Korea, it's a country that went through several regimes of dictatorship after World War II, it had a very different ring to it. It meant something more like military intelligence, basically. And so, in short, my research is a comparative project that tries to bring together two countries and also brings together the social, the political, and the aesthetic without one element dominating the other two. So, in my mind, all of these three elements, the social, political, and aesthetic, needs to be really thought together, and something which needs to be done in any kind of serious research that deals with the history of technology and the arts.
Fascinating, Eugene, fascinating. Me, as an astrophysicist, I always get fascinated when people talk about things which are on the earth and has an effect on our lives every day. Uh,
Yeah.
so let me ask you, when speaking to you off the record as well, you mentioned the term sometimes information society a couple of times. So could you explain for our listeners in a little bit what would you consider to be an information society and how do you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, information society is this term. There's an equivalent term in Japanese and Korean. In Japanese, it's Joho Shakai, and in Korean, it's 정보 사회. And it's a fairly trendy notion that came up, especially in the Western Hemisphere during the 1970s and 1980s. And it basically means a new kind of interconnected society that embraces computerization, and this, it's really a concept born against the historical backdrop of rapid technological development by the military during World War II, and also by big tech companies like IBM, right? Um, and with the birth of this new kind of society, it's a very optimistic kind of outlook on the world. With the arrival of computers, we'll have more leisure time, and it's going to also lead to a heightened kind of creativity.
Cool, 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 cool. And Eugene, one of the goals of our podcast series has been to kind of give listeners an insight into what a PhD actually entails, or what does the life look of a graduate student. So if you could tell us a little bit, I think I have now a very broad perspective of your research. And if you could delve a little bit deeper into exactly what you have been doing for your PhD and what kind of initial results or what have you found out till now, if you could share that with us.
Yeah. So PhD for me is kind of great because after a few years of doing masters and PhD, people become fatigued. And
That is true.
and the fortunate thing for me is that I came here without doing a master's somewhere else, and it's been I have to say I've been pretty grateful throughout my whole time here because I get to watch films and read things that I like
That sounds
for
great.
my work and talk to like very smart and I need to add very generous people in the department who are willing to spend their time with me to think and talk about these things. So in general, I would say I've just been really, really grateful to be here at Yale. And what is my daily life like? Yeah, so I really just wake up, read, and also teach students to think about these things. And actually, so I'm teaching in this course called Film 160, Introduction to Media, taught by Professor John Durham Peters, who's in the English department and also has an affiliation with Film and Media Studies program. He's actually the chair of the program at the moment. And yeah, it's been really, really great to talk to these undergraduate students to think about things that really seem separate to them, but kind of encourage them to think synthetically about, about the arts, about its social kind of background and the political context against which these things are really talked about. So, and your second question, what did I find out through my research, is that, like, one thing, there are many different historical approaches to questions regarding information and information society. And two, I would say is that information seems like a very universal concept to us, but it's actually not quite the same thing to everyone in the world. So I would say that's those two things are something that I've been able to discover through my research.
Yeah, that's especially all of this is so fascinating considering that how in our current socio-political context we have been thinking about and talking about information so much in different
Absolutely.
aspects of it. Yeah. And I will hold on to my question about that for a little bit, but we have now come to know Eugene, the researcher, but I want to get to know more about your life growing up and ending up here at Yale. So if you could tell us about your years growing up as a kid, where that happened, how that happened.
Yeah. So where to begin? So I am what they call a diplomat kid, very similar to a military brat. So I was born in Bogota, Colombia. Bogota, as my friends always correct me. It's not Bogota, it's Bogota, Colombia. And yeah, I grew up in Spain, Costa Rica, Poland, South Korea, and the U.S. But I spent a fair chunk of amount of time in the U.S. and South Korea, and yeah, it's a very interesting thing because academics, is particularly in my field, like to talk about the transnational and it's just another hip phrase that people are throwing around here and there to talk about social and cultural phenomena. But it's funny because like I kind of think about my trajectory, and it has been very kind of all over the world, and I don't like using fancy words to describe my life or myself, but it has been, like the word transnational. It's not such a foreign thing to me, and I'm really not the only one. There's so many people at Yale who have these kinds of cultural and physical trajectories that really defy physical boundaries and cultural boundaries, I should add. So, yeah, that's really, yeah.
So you are kind of one of the global residents of Yale, and you're correct. We see so many people here at Yale from such a wide variety of backgrounds and geographical locations. It's fascinating. Now, I know something about Eugene that before coming to Yale, you were in the South Korean military. So if you could tell us a little bit about your service in the military and your decision to come to Yale from that, and how was the transition like getting adjusted to life in New Haven?
Yeah, this is a dangerous question you're asking me, Archer, because when you ask Korean men what their military service was like, it's either of two things. It's like I was completely traumatized, or like the other side is like they'll just end up talking like hours and hours about their service, which is while drinking whatever is in their hands. So it's like there's no good outcome
Let's
with this
embark
question.
on this. Yeah.
But I'll just go with the safer version of answering this question, which is I served in the South Korean Navy as a lieutenant junior grade. That was my final ranking in the organization from 2015 and 2018, and my specialty was interpretation and translation. So I worked with a lot of American and Japanese servicemen. So going on business trips to Tokyo and sometimes the Middle East, which is quite random, and also the U.S. In Mississippi, where they have the naval research base there. And it was a pretty interesting experience because the military is a very has a very special temporality to it. And I would say it has a very distinct culture. And I kind of cherish it because experiencing that world before entering the academia is helpful because you kind of gain all these social skills and also deal with a variety of other kinds of people outside academia, and I think that's always kind of it gives you a different perspective to look at things. Basically.
Yeah. So it kind of broadened your horizons quite a bit, I guess.
Yeah.
And how was coming to Yale? Like, how did you end up coming here? And how did you kind of get accustomed to life?
Yeah. So while in the military, I was thinking of doing either two things after the service. It was either I want to become involved in filmmaking as a director or producer. That's one thing. Or the other option was to go into academia and do more research and writing. So those two things are still really, really my kind of dream objectives in life. And fortunately enough, I was able to do both, and I still continue to do both. And I was initially thinking of doing a master's somewhere else before doing a PhD, because I really didn't think that I would get into a program that I desired. But fortunately, Yale gave me a PhD offer, and it was a really great choice because of the interdisciplinary nature of the Film and Media Studies program here. So if you want to do a PhD in Film and Media Studies at Yale, you have to do it in conjunction with another department. So I have my colleagues in doing Film and Media and Art History, or Film and Media and English, or Film and Media and Slavic Literature, and so on and so forth. So it's really been great. It's very flexible. It's enabled me to do a lot of different things and take different courses and think about all of them together. So yeah.
Great, Eugene, and we are very glad that you ended up coming to Yale, of course. So, you have described your life kind of as having lived in many countries and having had very kind of diverse experiences in all of them. So, because of being an international student, do you think it has given you unique perspectives on life, or maybe on your PhD research as well?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Could you delve into that a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah. So I would say that being an international student, or being somebody who doesn't really belong to one specific culture entirely, is a privilege in a way, because it provides what I call like a third space from which you can think about culture and society. By third space, I mean you're neither in one culture or another. So it's kind of like almost like a distanced perspective through which you can think about things. And there are two intellectuals that I always kind of look up to in this regard. One is Stuart Hall, who's a Jamaican-born Marxist cultural theorist, and another person is Edward Said, who is also a cultural theorist who taught at Columbia University for several years, and has written this book on Orientalism, which is a kind of a very famous text in my field. And Stuart Hall and Edward Said, they also kind of see themselves as outsiders, right? And they talk about culture from this third space, and I think that's that's a very important thing to do, because it really does give you a critical perspective without being kind of being stuck in this quagmire within a lot of the cultural discussions, especially like in the U.S. You think about how people talk about politics and culture in this country, and I think it's important for people to take this kind of a critically distanced position to look at society, basically. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it's. I sometimes think about this, that because it surely must be correlated to like the kind of research that all of us graduate students do, that having lived our lives in the way that we have lived, it's interesting how kind of that impacts our research in different ways. And kind of to going towards the end of this podcast, Eugene, so you have given us a very interesting perspective into your research, into your kind of proposed thesis topic. So if I could ask you, what do you hope would be kind of the biggest thing that comes out of your thesis findings in terms of both just information and also specifically in the context of information in the modern society? So do you think your studies of information in the past, could it help us understand also about information in modern life?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say that studying this, the history of this concept, is quite informative because, for one thing, in the context of academia, it gave rise to what we now know as interdisciplinarity, right? This kind of institutional effort to encourage people to think across the disciplines. This really all comes out of against the backdrop of how people were thinking about information in information society. So in that regards, I would say it's a quite fascinating topic.
Mm-hmm.
And really, my kind of goal through this project is to, again, going back to what I was saying about the social, the political, and the aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
Like when people write about these things, they tend to be very they it's almost like disparate things that they talk about, and I always think that you can't really talk one without the other two. So that's really my primary goal for the public, really, through my research.
Cool. Thank you so much, Eugene, for kind of giving us this quick tour of your research and your life at Yale. Is there anything at the end you would like to share, or any final thoughts on this podcast series or anything else?
Not that I can think of, but yeah, I hope a lot of international students can listen to this podcast and kind of sometimes, like, I think actually not sometimes, but often, like, graduate being in graduate school is such a solitary effort, it seems. Particularly in the humanities. I don't know about you, but like in the humanities, there's not as much collaboration as in the STEM fields.
And especially with COVID also in the last
right.
few
Yeah,
years,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, with COVID. And I've always found this really bizarre. And it's something that I think needs to be improved upon. It's like in the humanities, people just do their research and that's it. Like you rarely kind of see people talking with each other. And I really hope that this doesn't become the future norm at Yale. It's like I think that, nobody wants to be kind of stuck in their rooms and just reading books and writing, and that's it. That's it for their academic life. And it's something that I try not to do. And if there's like a lonely soul listening to this podcast, then I just want to, I hope that this doesn't, that people make active efforts to prevent, this becoming the norm in this school.
So get people out of their silos. That's our goal.
Exactly.
And we definitely hope with this podcast series, both within the Yale community and also our alumni outside the university, people kind of get to know more about what graduate students do, what their lives look like, and everything else. So thank you very much, Eugene, for taking time out of your weekend to speak to us. And for all of you listeners, we'll have another episode very soon with another graduate student. Until then, goodbye, and thank you for listening to this podcast.
Thanks for having me, Aritra.
Yeah, it has been a pleasure.